entrepreneur spirit comes alive. We are excited to interview members in our community that are leaders, managers, and business owners. My name is Angelo Delguzzi, and I am here with Michael Burns, assistant teaching professor at University of Colorado. Thank you for being a guest on our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First question. Can you tell us about your career choice and the journey to get to where you are today?
Sure. So I grew up in Wintersville, and I'm an Indian Creek grad, even though I'm living in Colorado now. So I will put that out there. I'm still a member of the community and get back as much as I can. But my journey, it started here at Indian Creek, and where I found an interest in media and production and communication, public speaking. I really fell in love with all the opportunities to be in front of an audience anywhere I could. And so while I was here, I took as many classes as I could back in the early 2000s that had that type of technology. Things have changed a lot since I've been here. And started to do a lot of kind of thinking around what can I do for a living where I get to connect with people, build relationships. And so I went to Ohio University after I graduated from high school and studied communication. I found a degree that said communication in it. That's what I like to do. I like to talk. So I started there and started working there and fell in love with not just, when we think traditional kind of media journalism type of thing. I was really fascinated with behind the scenes and also what it takes to put on the production. I always thought I'd be online or be an on-air broadcaster, and I quickly realized that's not what I wanted to do once I got to college and realized there was other things. And that is where I then got an internship with NBC's Today Show in New York City. So I went my senior year to New York City and worked at the Today Show. And while I was there, I learned everything I could about production management and logistics, all the things behind the scenes that make that daily newscast happen. And then they offered me a position at the 2006 Winter Olympic Games in Torino, Italy, and they flew me to Italy. And I started working with the same show, the Today Show, at the Olympics. And since then, I've done 8 Olympics total, including Paris 2024. But that's the side of my life where I'm in industry. But also during that whole time, I also, liked connecting with people, mentoring people. I fell in love with teaching. I had a couple opportunities to teach during grad school. And decided, I was kind of interested in being a professor as well. Normally, you have to pick one or the other, but I'm stubborn and found a way to get creative and try to build a career where I could do both. So not only had I done the Olympics, but I decided to get a PhD and got a PhD in communication at North Dakota State University. And since then, I have had different professor jobs in Boston, Texas, and now at the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I teach communication and things like persuasion, sports communication, advanced teamwork and problem solving, training and development. And also, I still go to the Olympics, and they let me bring students, and I oversee their intern program. So I found a way to marry both my education world and my industry world at the Olympics. And, there's a lot of things that happen in between that, but there's the quick version of all of that from Wintersville to Boulder.
That's genuinely amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems to me that you've lived a pretty interesting life then, huh?
Yeah, I think about it, when you're growing up in a small town, sometimes we feel limited to what's around us. And, going to college was scary. It's scary for anybody, but, that was my first kind of step out of the valley into really experiencing what else exists. And once I got there, I had to get comfortable with being willing to take risks, showing up and trying things. Sometimes I'd get a little intimidated by, those folks that went to those really big high schools in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati or something, but realized, no, you just got to show up and try. And, and I realized what I learned at Indian Creek was, how to work hard. and be resourceful. And that's really all I needed. And from there, taking those risks allowed me to kind of seek out other opportunities. And next thing you know, I'm going, all over the world to the Olympic Games and covering those with the #1 news show in the world. And so sometimes I pinch myself because it's kind of wild that happens. But at the same time, if you kind of zoom out and look at all the steps along the way, it kind of does make sense. On the surface level, it doesn't. But when you kind of zoom out and realize the choices I made along the way, it wasn't I ever planned that. It's just that I found ways to take advantage of one opportunity, the next opportunity, the next opportunity, and next thing you know, you're 42 years old and going to your 8th Olympics and on a podcast at your old high school.
So I'm assuming you didn't imagine this when you were walking the stage at graduation?
Absolutely not. I always joke that I was friends with all the really smart kids, and so they challenged me. I scraped in there trying to be in the top 10, but all my friends, the other 9, were a lot smarter than me, but they challenged me. But I tease them. I got a PhD before they did. So.
That's nice. What advice do you have for someone interested in going into the communications industry?
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about communication right now is that as a society, we have become very under-practiced at communication, interacting, relationship building. And a reason for that is of our devices. We spend most of our day communicating through written forms of communication and not verbal forms. You don't even have to, call Domino's to order a pizza anymore, right? You can do it right on the app. And so over time, we've gotten worse at interacting, communicating, dealing with difficult conversations, motivating people, leading, persuading, just because we aren't having these micro moments all the time where we used to have to negotiate those things. And so somebody who's really interested in communicating and likes it, isn't intimidated by it, willing to learn about leadership and motivation and understand how people interact and connect, has an advantage because we're not great at it anymore. And so what I've noticed is if you can lean into that and lean into the vulnerability and really polish up what you'll hear in industry called soft skills, you're going to stand out. You're really going to stand out because it's a struggle for a lot of people. And, when you look at any industry, it doesn't matter the industry, communication's there, right? So it's one of those degree plans where, yes, you can go into what you think is traditional communication jobs, but, I have former students who work for aerospace engineering companies doing communication, who one is the head of communication for a pipe company, and I'm sure she didn't think, oh, I'm going to grow up and work in the pipe industry. But she does, and she does really, really well. I have, friends and students who work in the airline industry, right? No matter what it is, you can find that opportunity. And what I love about communication is it allows you to take your interests and the things that you're passionate about. Like I knew I was passionate about media, but I didn't want to be on TV necessarily. That there was a way for me to carve a path. And I think that's the beauty of a communication background and communication degree is carving your own path.
That's nice. It's almost like I feel like it's almost similar like working stage crew on a show.
Yeah, and one thing about stage crew on a show is a lot of problem solving. That's the big thing. Is probably the skill that I teach this class now. I teach an advanced problem solving class. If you can be resourceful and problem solve and think on the spot, a lot of times, do you do theater? Did you or no?
I've done my fair share.
Okay, all right. So you've done your fair share of shows here. I was in some shows back in the day in 2000, 2001-ish back here. You have a much better place to do them now than we did, so good for you. But what you'll notice is sometimes things don't go well, or something messes up. You forget a line, you miss a prop, you miss a cue, and if you're able to think on your feet, right, it's okay. And what's amazing to me is how many people don't think on their feet, panic, and either just run away or do nothing. And a lot of that has to do with not having these opportunities where you take the risks, you try these things, where you get to practice in a safe space that problem solving. And that's exactly what maybe doing a show here or being in a live my production, or when I was in school, we did the morning news. I don't know if that's still a thing, but we messed up a lot. And so you got to figure out along the way how to fix it and adjust. And so I think you're really kind of, you got a good example there when you talk about stage management.
Yeah. Of our last show we did for Shrek, our closing night, I think there was at least a quarter of the lines that were improvised on the spot because of something going wrong.
Yeah, see? And if you practice enough and you rehearsed enough and you knew each other enough, right, when you're up there and trust each other, that's the whole part of teamwork, right? And then you're able to adapt on the fly. And, not that you want to do that all the time, but sometimes those make for, better memories or maybe even a little better show sometimes.
Yeah. How do you define effective communication in today's world?
Yes. So we are living in a time where I believe communication's never been more important because we are living in a lot of turmoil. And if you turn on the TV or get online or anything, there's a lot of people who feel a lot of things, a lot of big feelings, and people who, aren't as willing to be open for discourse and debate like we used to. We live in a world where we get in kind of a tunnel vision, and our algorithms have created a space where we only hear the same messages over and over again, and whether they're true or not, when you hear something over and over again, that's your reality. So perception is reality and your truth. So I think for me, what I tell my students, and I teach intro courses at the university, and I have for a long time, is right now I think the most important skill to be a competent and effective communicator is being other-oriented. And what I mean by that is, for effective communication to work, we have to build understanding. So that's the first key. It's not about you, it's about the other person you're talking to. And so if we can focus on the people in front of us and how to build understanding, their backgrounds, their needs, trying to understand where they're coming from, if we start there, rather than from a defensive standpoint or a point where only my opinion matters, you're going to get a lot farther. And we have not celebrated or encouraged other-orientedness in a long time. Especially because that takes time, and we live in this kind of fast-paced, soundbite society. Let's put it up on social media or wherever, and I think that's the key, is being other-oriented and starting with the person in front of you, and not make it about yourself. And if you do that, they will typically mimic that back, and then you both are going to get closer to an understanding and respect. And I think what you also have to understand is, for someone to respect you and to understand you doesn't mean they have to agree with you. And I think that's part of that other-orientedness is being okay with differing opinions,
Right.
but we can do it respectfully.
Right. I feel like that's something we could see a lot more of in politics today.
Yes, I think our folks in Washington need to take my class.
What's your approach to teaching communication to today's students who've grown up in a digital world?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we've hinted to some of this already. And, I've been teaching for a long time, and there has been a change in terms of things like attention span, and, trying to help people understand the value in creating a clear message, critical thinking, being other-oriented, listening, all of that. And so for me, my approach is kind of shocking the system from the start with it. I have pretty strict phone rules, for example, in my class. I know it's college, and you think you get to go to college and you have some freedom, but if you're on your phone in my class, you're absent. That's just how it goes. No phones, right? It's a communication course where you connect, and we got to talk, and you got to interact. I think about how the assignments are structured have changed a lot, where, I reward people for being engaged and for participating and talking, and I do a lot of assignments that are almost the whole semester long, that require a lot of opportunities for them to stand up and present and talk and push those comfort zones. I make them go interview people, talk to people. So I take an approach that's, really leaning in, right? For example, my small group communication class, I've everything's done in group work. And people think, oh, that'll be easy. Well, what's interesting is the content itself is not hard, but doing group work is hard. Doing small group communication is hard. And so making them make all their decisions together, think through that process, and it frustrates them because they want to just, get it done real quick, put it into AI or whatever it might be. And I find ways to limit that because, my goal is to create critical thinkers, and then also show them, I'm not anti-technology by any means. I want them to use it as a tool and not a lifestyle, right? And so how do we use it to enhance our communication and our understanding? And sometimes you got to start by taking it away a little bit for them to be reminded of what the human mind is capable of doing.
If I was in your class, would I be one of the good students? Or?
I don't know. How often are you on your phone? That's the key.
I guess, to be fair, anytime I get a break.
Okay, well, we just make you put it in the bag, and then you'd be a good student, I'm sure.
Right. Sweet. What's one communication tip you think of that dramatically improved people's lives?
I think the most underrated communication skill is listening. And it sounds simple, but think about it. That's the one thing we do the most of all day. Of all the communication skills we do it more than writing, we do it more than speaking, we do listening. Most of our day is spent listening. We have formal classes in writing, we have formal classes in speaking, but it is very rare that we find a class that we teach kids how to listen. And because we are under practiced, as I mentioned before, at interacting, our listening skills have gotten worse. And it takes a lot of work to listen, right? I try to explain to people there's a difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. And most times when we are listening, it's kind of instinctual to want to think about what we're going to say next rather than really focusing in on the person, paying attention, trying to process what they are saying and trying to understand it. And that's what you need to do. But that takes work. It takes a lot of work. It takes energy. And so it is tiring. And you don't have to listen, crazy intensely to everything, obviously. But, when you're interacting, talking in class, right, what are the ways to practice those listening skills? And so I try to remind people, put away the distractions. Taking notes, for example, is a way to help you stay focused. Putting away your phone, obviously, practicing that, or even admitting when you're tired, right? There's sometimes of the day that it's easier to listen than others, So I think about that even when I'm scheduling meetings or important conversations with students or my boss or whoever, right? What times a day, if possible, am I much more on my A game than others when it comes to listening? Because it's tiring, My friends who are therapists, that's why they're exhausted at the end of the day, because they listen to understand all day long. It's an exhausting thing to do. So I think if we can all kind of lean in and practice our listening skills more, we would see a lot more connection and things would make a lot more sense. And we might not jump to conclusions as quickly as we do that are sometimes wrong.
Yeah. I feel like I've used some listening skills. What qualities do you think every leader should possess?
So I teach a leadership course, and obviously it's going to focus a lot on communication. But I think something that I usually tell, and I from the entrepreneur standpoint, I also have a side hustle. I have my own consulting and training company that I do as well when people need things. And I train and work with a lot of leaders from all over the world. And one thing that I usually work with them on is understanding that if you set high expectations and give people a chance or an opportunity to reach those and trust them and empower them, most times it works out. And I think sometimes we forget that power, leaders typically have power, obviously. Power is given, though, right? And so when you're given power, there's responsibility with it. But what's also interesting about leadership and power dynamics is the more power a leader gives away. So if I empower you to do this, take on this project, try to do this without me, right? I trust you, right? The more empowerment, you actually give me more power back, right? And so there's this reciprocal relationship. And so the key to leadership is empowering as many people as possible in your team, on your team or in your community, A, you won't have to do as much, but B, there's this opportunity for them to see that you value, respect them, and you actually are perceived as a good leader, but also given more power. And you start to see these folks develop their own leadership skills. So, leadership, sometimes you have a role as the leader, but leadership is something that should be practiced by everyone on the whole group, in the whole team, whatever it is, right? And so if you can empower folks and allow them to step up to those leadership opportunities, that'll make your life easier. Smart leaders surround themselves with other leaders is kind of what I always say.
Right. Something I noticed about the way you talk is you use a lot of motion to convey it, which, in my opinion, I think it's more engaging.
Yeah.
Because it shows like how much enthusiasm you're putting behind your words.
Yeah, so that's what we call nonverbal communication, right. The meta messages, if you will, the messages within the messages. And I wish I could tell you that was because I have a PhD in this, that I know that I'm some kind of nonverbal expert. Nope, I am just a very antsy, anxious person who paces a lot, and so the movement is a way for me to channel that energy, and not be sitting here, shaking my leg or rubbing my ear, or if I had long hair, play with my hair or something like that, right? And so if I I always say, especially with public speaking, you have nerve bubbles and they need to get out, right? So if you trap them in, they might go to your voice and your voice will tremble, or they might come in other parts of your body. So if you move a little bit, you let the nervous energy out and it feels better.
Right. How do you define success?
Ooh, success. That's a tough one. So there's a lot of ways to do it. And I think traditionally, when you go to college or to a job or somewhere, or sometimes in schooling, you hear a lot of people define success, and it usually relates to jobs and money, right? And if that's the case, then, being a college professor, you don't get paid a ton. So, like, I failed then, I guess. So I don't like that. I don't like that answer. That's one way, right, to be successful. And there's nothing wrong with being successful in that route. But I think for me, success is if I am putting energy into people, into my community, and people are responding to it and getting better for it, right? And so if I can kind of pave the way or help someone or assist someone, mentor somebody, and they're a little bit better, then that's success. I tell my students all the time that, the way you change the world is by changing someone's world. And so, what can I do to change someone's world, right? In terms of what's going on right in front of them in that moment. And that's true for a student. That's true for my family. That's true for, a client of mine that I'm working with, or even if it's like a temporary moment, at a store, with someone I'm interacting with there. So I think that's kind of, for me, was each day successful is kind of based on, did I have just a little bit of impact somehow, even if it's just making somebody feel a little better or smile, or feel a little more confident in the next step of, whatever they're going to do next. That's kind of how I do it, because if you think too big and you set too high of standards, sometimes, if those change or those shift, we feel like we didn't succeed. I'm a big believer in short-term goals, because if you set too far forward, right, sometimes you're setting goals for someone who doesn't exist yet, and so I don't think it's smart to, set goals that are too far down the line, because you're going to change a lot in that meantime.
One step at a time, huh?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for graduating seniors?
Well, so, I think the thing when you're graduating is it's a little scary, right? You don't know what's next. There's some responsibility coming in, all of that. But the thing that I tell most high school seniors, and I tell this to college seniors as well, when you're young, that's the best time to take a risk, because you don't have as far to fall, right? And so when you're taking a risk when you're young, if you mess up and totally screw up, that's okay, right? You're probably only affecting yourself, The older you get, the more responsibility you have. Maybe there's the more people you're responsible for, the more money you have, all of that, right? So the risks you have to get more and more calculated with your risks as you get older. But when you're young, you don't have much to lose, right? So try it, put it out there, right? And take the risk. And why not, right? Because you have plenty of time to recover from it. And so that risk can look a lot of different ways. I think about the risk I took when I got the internship at the Today Show my senior year of college. I had to move to New York City, and back then internships weren't paid. So I had to figure out, like, moving to New York City, figuring out a way to pay for it, get this opportunity. And so the risk turned into me taking out a little bigger student loan, figuring out ways to work all over the holiday break and in the summer to save. And that risk worked out, right? I had a little bit of debt from it when I was 22, but if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have done 8 Olympics, right? And if I would have went and screwed up royally, I would have had plenty of time to make up for that as well in terms of that. So sometimes we get a little scared, and there's usually always a way to figure it out, right? I think we get a little limited in our way of thinking because in a lot of ways, the American education system is set up to make you think there's one correct answer, and there's not. There's multiple ways to get to the answer. And so, you obviously got to follow rules and things and laws, but you can always work. You can figure out where your boundaries are with those and work and get creative on the inside in between those things. And I think that's kind of been my big approach is take the risk, figure out where your boundaries are, try it out. And what's the worst can happen, right? When you're young, it's like, oh, well, I tried it, at least. I screwed it up, but I learned something from it. And I think, because we have that mentality, there's one right way, that back to your success question, we think we messed up, we failed, but, take a risk. You'll learn something from it, and why not, right? Move across the country, move to a new place, right? Do what you got to do. Travel for a bit, take this job that doesn't seem like the thing that you thought you would do, but it still sounds interesting. All those things are little risks.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for tuning in to Creekcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Until next time, keep learning.